Maribel Thompson stepped down from the stagecoach, and the world dissolved into grit. The dust of Junction Creek, Wyoming, was a living thing, a fine, alkaline powder that coated her tongue, stung her eyes, and settled like a shroud on the shoulders of her dark wool dress. She held her valise in one hand and her reticule in the other, standing as still as a heron, trying to brace herself against the wind and the silence. The town was not a town. It was a wound in the earth, a collection of raw pine buildings huddled against a vast, indifferent sky. There was a saloon, its bat-wing doors flapping idly, a mercantile with a porch full of staring men, a livery stable breathing fumes of manure and hay, and a squat building with a hopeful sign that read, "Stage Telegraph." The welcome was a wall of eyes. Men in dusty hats stopped their whittling, their low conversations dying in their throats. They looked her over, from her worn-to-kid boots to the brim of her respectable black bonnet. Their appraisal was slow, thorough, and empty of welcome. It was the look of men who had not seen a new woman in months. And this one was not what they expected. She was too thin, too pale, too quiet. She looked like a sparrow that had flown into a slaughterhouse. A man in a black string tie detached himself from the shadow of the mercantile. He was tall and impossibly thin, and he moved with a dry, rustling sound, like corn husks. "You would be Miss Maribel Thompson." His voice was as dry as the dust. "I am," she said. Her own voice sounded small, stolen by the wind. The man looked at the ground, then at his own boots, then at a point somewhere past her left shoulder. "My name is Silas Croft. I am the town arranger. For finalities." He cleared his throat. A small, scraping sound. "I regret to inform you, madam, that your intended Mr. Ephraim Abernathy has expired." Maribel had prepared for a hard life. She had prepared for a coarse man, for a life of grueling work and bitter winters. She had prepared for disappointment. She had not, however, prepared for this. The world tilted slightly. The stares of the townsfolk sharpened, becoming hungry. "Expired," she repeated. The word was absurd. 2 days passed, Croft said, gaining a miserable momentum. His heart, it was sudden. "We are, at this moment, constructing the vessel for his internment. Pine is scarce." As if summoned, the sound of a lone hammer echoed from a barn behind the mercantile. Thwack! Pause! Thwack! A slow, measured, final sound. They were building her groom's coffin. "I see," she whispered. She did not see at all. She felt a cold, hollow space open in her chest. "He left word at the mercantile," Croft continued, eager to be done. "Paid for your passage, but nothing else. There was no will. Miss Thompson, the homestead, it reverts to the railroad claim." The silence that followed was absolute. Maribel stood, a statue of black wool. While the implications settled on her, her funds were gone. The last of her money had paid for this one-way ticket to a life that had just evaporated. She had no way back east. She had no way forward. "Bad luck," a man's voice muttered from the saloon porch, loud in the quiet. "Bad luck follows that kind." Maribel turned. 2 women, their faces pinched and righteous under their bonnets, were standing outside the mercantile. As Maribel's gaze met theirs, they visibly stiffened. One pulled her child closer, and both turned their backs to her. A deliberate, shunning gesture. She took a step, uncertain. Where was she to go? The hotel. She looked at the 2-story building. It was part of the saloon. A woman with hair the color of a bad sunset and a dress of startling red satin pushed through the saloon doors. She was carrying a bucket. She saw Maribel, took in the travel-worn but respectable dress, the pale face, the desperate stillness. The woman's painted mouth twisted. She took 2 steps and spat a dark stream of tobacco juice into the dust, just inches from Maribel's feet. "We don't need more of your kind here," the woman said, her voice a low rasp. "Town's full." She hitched the bucket and disappeared around the side of the building. Maribel flinched, a hot, shameful flush rising up her neck. She was classed, tried, and convicted in a single glance. She was nothing, a piece of driftwood. "Now, Missy, that's a predicament," a new voice said. "This one thick and oily." She turned. The man who ran the livery, Jed Smalls, had approached. He was large, with a stained vest stretched tight over a round belly. He smelled of horses, sweat, and cheap tobacco. His small, wet eyes moved over her body, lingering. "A real predicament," he said again, almost smiling. "You got no funds. You got no man. You got no place." He hitched his trousers. "The hotel won't take a lady in your situation, not without pay in advance." Maribel simply stared, her hands clenched on her valise. "I got a cot in the tack room," Smalls offered, his voice dropping to a confidential wheeze. "It's warm, out of the wind." She looked at him, the way he was looking at her, the unspoken thing that hung in the air between them. "I could not pay," she said, her voice tight. "Oh, I reckon we could work something out," he said. He reached out and put a heavy, damp hand on her arm. "You'd earn your keep, of course. Keep the place tidy. A bit of company. It gets lonely out here." His thumb began to rub a small circle on her forearm, a proprietary, disgusting gesture. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. It was too hard. It hurt. "You'll be grateful for it, girl," he grunted, his smile widening. "Better than the dirt. Let her go." The voice was not loud. It was low, flat, and full of gravel. It cut through the wind like a thrown knife. Smalls froze. He looked past Maribel. She turned, her arm still trapped. A man was standing there. He had come from the mercantile, carrying a small sack of flour and a box of cartridges. He was not a large man, not like Smalls, but he was built of wire and dry wood. He wore a faded Union coat, years past its service, and a hat pulled low. His face was all angles, weathered to the color of old leather. A long, puckered scar ran from his temple down his jaw, pulling one side of his mouth into a permanent, grim half-smile. But it was his eyes that stopped everything. They were gray, the color of a winter river, and they were fixed on Jed Smalls with a stillness that was more threatening than any shout. "This ain't your business, Ward," Smalls sputtered, but he did not let go. The man, Ward, took one slow step forward. He did not raise his voice. "I said, let her go." There was no or else. There was no threat. It was a statement of fact, as simple and as final as the hammer blows on the coffin. Smalls looked at the man's eyes, and the bluster drained out of him. He released Maribel's arm as if it had burned him, wiping his hand on his vest. Just offering a bed. No need to get—" "Go," Ward said. Smalls went, scurrying back into the darkness of his stable, muttering about meddlers and ghosts. The man, Eli Ward, turned his flat gray gaze on Maribel. It was not kind. It was not unkind. It was an assessment. "You the woman for Abernathy?" he asked. She nodded, unable to speak. Her arm throbbed where Smalls had gripped it. He was a neighbor, of a sort. A long, uncomfortable silence stretched, filled only by the wind. "You can't stay here. The livery ain't safe for you. The hotel won't take you." He looked at the sky, which was darkening to a bruised purple. "It's going to snow." Maribel waited. This man had saved her, but he looked as hard as the land itself. "My place is 6 miles north, in the draw," he said, as if it pained him. "Got a spare room. Small. You can stay, just until the snow melts, or until you find passage back." He looked at her directly, and she saw the coldness in his eyes. "Temporary." She looked at the stable where Smalls had disappeared. She looked at the saloon, where a man was now laughing. She looked at this scarred, quiet stranger. He was offering her nothing but a roof, and he was offering it with a reluctance that bordered on resentment, but he was not looking at her like Smalls had. "I have no money to pay you," she said. "I ain't asking for pay," Eli Ward said. He jerked his head toward a worn, buckboard wagon tied in front of the mercantile. "Come or don't. I'm leaving now." He turned and walked to the wagon, throwing his supplies in the back. He did not look back to see if she was following. Maribel stood for one more second, suspended between the known threat and the unknown. She took a breath, tasting only the grit, and walked to the wagon, climbing up onto the hard wooden seat. He untied the mules and slapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, leaving Junction Creek and its hammer blows behind. The ride was 6 miles of purgatory. The wind rose from a whine to a howl, tearing at her bonnet and chilling her to the bone. They did not speak. Eli Ward kept his eyes on the trail, his scarred profile rigid. The land was brutal. They climbed out of the shallow valley into the high ridges, a landscape of gray sagebrush, black volcanic rock, and stunted pines. The world was empty of life, empty of color, empty of softness. It was a place that wanted you dead. Maribel clutched her valise, her knuckles white. She had traded one fear for another, perhaps a greater one. This man was taking her into the absolute middle of nowhere. He was a man who carried a rifle as if it were part of his arm, a man the livery owner feared, his homestead. When they finally reached it, was barely a scar on the land. It was tucked into a deep draw to break the wind. A small, dark cabin and a leaning barn. There was no paint. There were no curtains in the single window. No flowers. No porch. Not even a dog. It was the home of a man who did not want to be found. It was isolated, wind-beaten, and utterly empty of joy. He pulled the wagon to a stop and simply sat for a moment, staring at his own front door. "We're here," he said. Inside was no better. It was clean, but bare to the point of punishment. A cold black stove, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, in one corner, a narrow bed with a gray blanket, in the other, a small cot. The floor was packed earth, swept clean. The air smelled of wood smoke, old coffee, and a deep, profound solitude. "Stove's cold," he said, stating the obvious. He gestured to the main bed, the narrow one in the corner. "That's yours." He moved outside, and she watched through the open door as he unhitched the mules and led them into the barn. She was alone in the cabin, and her body was shaking, not just from the cold. She sat on the edge of the bed. It was hard. The blanket was coarse wool. He returned, his arms full of firewood. He did not look at her. He knelt at the stove and, with quick, efficient movements, built a fire. The silence was thick, broken only by the crackle of the kindling and the rising scream of the wind outside. He made coffee. He fried slabs of salt pork in a pan and warmed a pot of beans. He set a tin plate and a tin cup in front of her on the table, then took his own and sat on the other chair. 6 feet away, they ate. Maribel had not eaten since morning, but the food tasted like ash. She forced herself to swallow. The silence was deafening. The only sound was the scrape of their forks on the tin plates. And then, another sound, a high, yipping cry, answered by another. Closer. Coyotes. A chorus of them, sounding frantic and lonely and starved. Maribel's fork froze. "They're just coyotes," Eli said, not looking up. "They won't come near the cabin." She finished her food, her stomach a tight knot. She stood and took her plate to the wash basin. "Leave it," he said. "Get some sleep. You look done in." She went to the bed, her movements stiff. She was too tired to be frightened, and too frightened to sleep. She lay down fully dressed, pulling the wool blanket up to her chin. She turned her face to the rough plank wall. She heard him clear the table, heard the scrape of his chair, heard him check the rifle, the metallic snick of the action. Then she heard him go outside. She rolled over. Through the small, grime-caked window, she could see his shape, a dark silhouette against the dying light. He was pacing, back and forth, in the patch of dirt between the cabin and the barn, the crunch of his boots on the frozen ground, back and forth, like a caged wolf. He was not coming inside. An hour passed. The cabin grew cold again as the fire burned down. The wind hammered at the walls. Finally, she heard the door creak open. She squeezed her eyes shut, her body rigid, pretending to be asleep. She heard him move to the stove, add a single log, heard the rustle of a blanket, She waited for the cot to creak. It did not. She heard him settle on the floor, near the door. A long sigh. The sound of a man setting down a heavy burden. He was sleeping on the floor. He had given her the only bed. He had placed himself between her and the door. Maribel let out a breath she did not know she was holding. It was a gesture of respect, or perhaps a gesture of profound distance. He was not her host. He was her guard. But was he guarding her from the world, or guarding himself from her? She did not sleep. She lay awake, listening to the two sounds that filled the world, the wind trying to tear the cabin apart, and the slow, steady breathing of the stranger on her floor. She must have drifted off, because she woke to a gray light and the smell of coffee. She sat up, her body aching. Eli was not there. The cabin was empty. His blanket was neatly folded by the door. She stood, stiffly, and went to the basin. There was a bucket of water, a film of ice on its surface. She broke it with her fingers and splashed the frigid water on her face, trying to wake the dead thing inside her. She looked up and gasped. He was standing in the doorway, watching her. He had his shirt off, and he was wiping his face and chest with a wet cloth. He must have just come from the pump. He froze when he saw her. He was not built for size, but for endurance. His body was a map of hard living, all sinew and bone, and it was covered in scars. Small, pale marks, a few larger ones, but her eyes were drawn to one in particular, a long, ropey, puckered scar that ran from under his left arm, halfway across his ribs. It was not a clean cut. It was the mark of something that had torn him open. He saw where she was looking. His gray eyes went flat and dead. The air in the cabin turned to ice. "Don't," he said. His voice was barely a whisper, but it was the most violent sound she had ever heard. He grabbed his shirt from a peg and pulled it on, his movements quick and angry. He buttoned it to the neck, hiding the history. He turned, grabbed his rifle, and went back outside without another word. Maribel sank onto the chair, her heart hammering. She had seen something she was not meant to see. She had seen the proof of his reputation, the whispers in town. She had not heard them, but she had felt them. This was a man who knew violence. He had been a sharpshooter in the war. She'd heard that much. But the scar? That was not from any war she knew. That was something closer, something personal. He carried the guilt of men he had killed, and it lived in that scar, in the coldness of his eyes, in the way he slept by the door. Later, when he was gone, checking traps or hunting, she finally opened her valise. It was not heavy. There were 2 other dresses, both as plain and dark as the one she wore. Mending thread, a bar of lye soap, her mother's Bible, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a piece of faded flannel, was a small, silver-plated hand mirror. She unwrapped it. The plating was worn, showing the brass beneath. The glass was chipped at one edge. It was the one beautiful thing she owned. She held it up, her hand shaking. She looked at her reflection. The woman who stared back was a stranger. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and hollow. There were dark circles under them. She was 30 years old, but she looked 50. She looked resigned. There was no hope left, no fight, just a dull, hollow acceptance. This was her life now, trapped in a box with a scarred man, waiting for a spring that might never come. She was still staring at that hollow woman when the first flakes of snow began to fall. They were not idle flakes. They were small, hard, and fast, swirling past the window in a sudden, angry gust. She heard the door open. Eli came in, stomping his boots. He carried a rabbit, which he hung by the door. He did not look at her, or the mirror in her hand. He looked at the window. "It started," he said. Maribel put the mirror down, flannel side up. She went to the window and watched. It was not a gentle snow. It was a horizontal assault. The sky, the ground, the ridges, they all disappeared in a matter of minutes. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the cabin, and the sound of the wind rose to a high-pitched scream. It was a physical weight, pressing against the small building. By nightfall, it was a blizzard. There was no going back to Junction Creek. The stage would not run. The passes would be closed. There was no way back. There was no way forward. Maribel looked at Eli, who was methodically skinning the rabbit, his hands sure and practiced. He was the only other human being in this white, screaming world. They were stuck. The blizzard was not an event. It was a state of being. It did not stop for 8 days. The world was reduced to a howling, pressurized whiteness. The wind never ceased, a low, maddened moan that vibrated in Maribel's teeth. The cabin was a small, dark rock at the bottom of a frozen ocean. They fell into a pattern of survival that was more animal than human. Their lives were dictated by the demands of the cold, and their only conversations were actions. Eli Ward lived outside the cabin. He existed in the storm. He would pull his hat low, wrap a scarf over his scarred jaw, and disappear into the white. He would return hours later, encased in ice, his face raw. He brought wood. He was always chopping, the thunk of his axe a dull heartbeat against the shriek of the wind. He brought back 2 more rabbits, stiff and frozen. He spent a day on the roof of the small barn, fighting the wind to nail down a loose sheet of tin that threatened to tear the whole structure apart. Maribel lived inside. She kept the stove. The stove was the center of their universe. It was the only source of warmth, the only light, the only means of sustenance. Her life became a cycle of feeding it wood, melting buckets of snow for water, and making the meager food last. The salt pork ran out. The beans ran low. They ate the rabbit, boiled down to a thin, stringy broth. It was hot, and that was enough. She swept the packed earth floor. She mended Eli's socks, her fingers stiff with cold. She scrubbed the tin plates. She sat on her cot, watching the snow, and learned the anatomy of silence. It was not the hostile silence of the first night. That had been sharp, brittle, a thing of edges. This was a new silence. It was heavy, deep, and shared. It was the silence of 2 people in a lifeboat, saving their breath. On the 5th day, she found a small, rotten trunk pushed under his cot. It held nothing but a few moldering Union uniforms, riddled with holes, and a single, heavy greatcoat, the wool thick but badly stained. It was beyond mending. She took it. She spent 3 days with her small sewing kit, tearing the coat into strips and then sewing them back together. Her fingers bled. The needle was icy, but she worked, her stitches small and tight. Eli came in, shaking snow from his shoulders, and stopped. He watched her for a full minute. She was sewing the last of the panels together. She was making curtains. It was a hopeless, absurd, necessary gesture, an attempt to claim the space. He said nothing. He turned to the stove, warmed his hands, and went back outside to find more wood. But when he came back in for the night, she had them hung, tied back with scraps of twine. They were ugly, the color of old blood and mud, but they blocked the gaping blackness of the window. The cabin felt, for the first time, like a room. He did not acknowledge them, but that night he did not pace. He simply sat at the table, cleaning his rifle, the silence between them a little less cold. On the 9th day, the wind stopped. The silence that fell was shocking. So loud it woke Maribel from a shallow sleep. The world was bright blue and blinding white. The snow was piled in drifts higher than the door. Eli looked out the window, his face grim. "The game will be starving," he said. It was the first full sentence he had spoken to her in a week. He took his rifle and his snowshoes and left. He was gone for 2 days. Maribel was alone. The silence changed again. It became hollow, empty, and terrifying. The coyotes came back, their cries sounding desperate. She kept the fire burning. She paced from the window to the stove. She felt the hollow, cold space in her chest begin to widen. She was alone, and the fear that lived in that space began to move. When Eli returned, he was dragging a deer. It was a small doe, thin from the storm, but it was life. He set to butchering it. Maribel came out of the cabin, her shawl pulled tight. She watched the grim, necessary work. The snow around his boots turned red. She did not look away. When he began to wrap the meat, She was there, holding the cloths. He glanced at her, a quick, sharp look. He had expected her to be sick. She was pale, but her hands were steady. "Go inside," he said. "It's cold. I am used to the cold." She said they worked together, wrapping the venison, storing it in the icy lean-to that served as a pantry. That night, they ate roasted meat. It was rich and hot, and it tasted like victory. The silences softened. They sat by the fire, the cabin filled with the smell of roasting meat and wood smoke. "You are good with a needle," he said, nodding toward the ugly curtains. "My mother taught me," she replied. A pause. "You never speak of your people." She looked at the fire. "They are gone. Fever. There was nothing left for me back east." It was a lie, a half-truth, which was the worst kind of lie. There was plenty left back east. There was a memory she was running from, a memory that had just as sharp teeth as the coyotes. He accepted the lie. "This is hard country for a woman alone. It seems hard country for anyone," she said. And then, finding a small scrap of courage, she asked, "That scar, on your side, was it the war?" His body went still. The air between them, which had been warming, turned to ice again. He had been cleaning his knife. His hand stopped. "No," he said. He offered nothing else. The word hung in the air. A closed door. He had deflected. The wall was back up. "It is none of my business," she said, looking down. "No," he said again, not unkindly, but with finality. "It is not." The routine returned. Wood, water, food. But something had thawed, and something else had frozen harder. One morning, just before the false dawn, she screamed. It was not a small sound. It was a raw, tearing cry that ripped the cabin's silence. Eli was off the floor in an instant, his hand grabbing the pistol he kept by his blanket. He was awake, alert, and armed before his eyes were even open. She was fighting. She was tangled in her blankets, her arms flailing, her fingernails clawing at the empty air in front of her. "No!" she was gasping, her voice thick with sleep. "Get off! Get off!" "Maribel," he said it calmly. She did not hear. She was fighting for her life. "Maribel." He took a step closer. He reached out, not to touch her, but to grab the blanket she was strangling. "Wake up! You are dreaming." Her eyes snapped open. They were wide, black, and filled with a terror so profound he took a step back. She did not see him. She saw the thing from her dream. She scrambled backward, crashing against the cabin wall, her breath coming in short, panicked sobs. She looked at him, at the gun in his hand, at the dark, at her own hands. I am," she stammered. "I am sorry. The dream—" He slowly, pointedly, placed the pistol on the table. He stood by the stove, keeping his distance. "You are safe," he said. His voice was flat. "It was a dream." She was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She wrapped her arms around her knees, pulling them to her chest. "It comes back," she whispered, staring at the wall. When it is quiet for too long." He nodded, his face in shadow. "I will light the lamp." He moved to the lamp, struck a match. The small, yellow light pushed back the worst of the shadows. He did not move toward her. He did not offer comfort. He simply stood, a guardian in the dark, waiting. She looked at her own hands, at her fingernails. They were trembling. "You should stay away from me, Mr. Ward," she said, her voice a low, broken thing. He did not answer. "My hands," she said, and she laughed, a sound more terrible than a sob. "My hands wander when I'm lonely." The words fell into the quiet cabin. He frowned, not understanding. She looked up at him, her eyes desperate. "I am not safe when I'm alone too long. I am not safe for you." She was warning him. Her voice broke on the last word. She was warning him that the violence in her sleep was not just a dream. It was a memory, and it was a capability. Eli Ward looked at her, this small, thin woman huddled against the wall, and he saw something he recognized. He saw the look of a trapped animal, He saw the same haunted darkness he saw in his own reflection. He did not move toward her. He did not offer a hand. He did not say it was all right. "Get some water," he said, his voice quiet. "The dream is past." He offered her quiet sympathy. A lamp, a cup of water. But he would not touch her. He stayed on his side of the cabin, a gulf of 6 feet between them. The rest of the night passed in silence. She sat on her bed. He sat at the table, watching the fire. When the sun came up, she was cold, exhausted, and filled with a raw, desperate anger. The fear had burned away. Leaving this, he was outside, chopping wood, the rhythmic thunk in accusation. She stalked to the door. "Is that all you do?" she cried out, her voice raw. "Chop wood? Hide!" He stopped, axe in mid-swing. He looked at her. "There is wood to chop. I was frightened," she said, her voice shaking. "And you just stood there, like a stone." "You were safe," he said, turning back to the wood. "I did not want to be safe," she screamed. "I wanted—" She did not know what she wanted. "You are a coward, Eli Ward. You hide behind that scar and that silence. You are a ghost." He set the axe down. He walked toward her, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped a few feet away. His gray eyes were cold. "I am not a coward, Mrs. Abernathy," he said, using her dead groom's name. It was a slap. "I am careful. There is a difference." "Careful of what?" she spat. "Of a woman half your size? Of a dream?" "Of what happens when people stop being careful," he said, his voice low. "Now go inside. You're letting the heat out." He turned his back on her. It was the final, unforgivable insult. He had dismissed her. He had seen her terror and her warning, and he had dismissed her. That night, the argument started again. It was quiet at first, a venomous, whispered fight over the salt in the beans, over the way he left the door open, over the way he looked at her, or rather, the way he did not look at her. "You think I am cursed," she hissed. "That is what you think, just like them. You think I am spoiled." "I think you talk too much," he said, turning to clean his rifle. "Look at me," she shouted. "There is nothing to see." "There is." She flew at him. It was not a thought. It was an explosion, a raw, desperate need to make him see her, to make him feel something, to break the careful wall. She grabbed the front of his rough woolen shirt with both hands. He stood up, surprised, but he did not raise his hands to her. "Stop," he said. "Or what?" she cried. "Will you hurt me? Are you careful, or are you dead?" And she tore the shirt. The wool was thick, but her desperation was stronger. She pulled, and the buttons popped, scattering across the floor. She ripped the fabric down, exposing his chest, exposing the scar. She stopped. Her hands were still on his shirt, her knuckles brushing his skin. He was warm, alive. He stood perfectly still. He let her. His arms were at his sides. He did not stop her. He just watched her, his gray eyes unreadable, his face a mask. They stood, frozen, for a full 10 seconds. The only sound was the fire crackling and their own ragged breathing. She was breathless. He was breathless. The air was electric, charged with violence and something else, something deeper and more terrifying. Maribel looked at her hands, at the torn shirt, at the pale, ropey scar running along his ribs. She had done this. She snatched her hands back as if she had been burned. Shame, hot and absolute, washed over her. She turned, her shoulders hunched, and walked to her cot. She lay down, her back to him, and pulled the blanket over her head. She heard him, after a long time, let out a slow, shaky breath. She heard him pick up the buttons, one by one. She heard him sit at the table. He did not mend the shirt. He did not sleep. He sat a vigil, in the dark, until morning. The next day, the cabin was too small to hold them. The shame was a third person in the room, a heavy, wet, suffocating presence. They avoided each other's eyes. He wore his old Union coat, buttoned to the chin, to hide the torn shirt. The thaw had begun. The snow was melting, the world dripping. The path to town, he announced, was likely clear. He had to go. They were out of flour, out of salt, out of coffee. I will not stay here alone, she said, her voice flat. It is a long ride. He said, I do not care. They rode in silence. The land was a sea of brown mud and gray, rotting snow. When they reached Junction Creek, it was as if they had brought the plague. The town had spent the winter stewing. The whispers started the moment they tied the wagon. That's him. That's Ward, the butcher's ghost. And that's her, the one Abernathy ordered. Living with him, in his cabin, for weeks. Jed Smalls saw them from the livery and spat in the mud. The women from the mercantile crossed the street to avoid walking past Maribel. The saloon girl laughed, a loud, brassy sound, and called out, He break you in yet, girlie? Maribel kept her eyes forward, her back straight, her face a pale mask. Eli ignored it all. He moved through the town like a shadow, his face grim. He bought his supplies, his voice low, his transactions quick. As they were loading the last sack, a man in a clean black suit approached them. He was tall, with a gaunt face and eyes that burned with a cold, righteous fire. Mr. Ward, the man said. Eli stopped. Reverend, I must have a word with you. The preacher, Reverend Gideon, said. He looked at Maribel, and his expression was one of profound, pitying disgust. In private, whatever you have to say, you can say to us both, Eli said. The preacher's thin lips tightened. Very well, Mr. Ward, this arrangement, it is a stain on this community. It is an affront to God. I gave the woman shelter, Eli said, his voice flat. You are living in sin, Gideon pressed, his voice rising. The town whispers. They say she is cursed. She brings bad luck. She arrived, and Mr. Abernathy was struck down. The worst blizzard in memory follows. She is trouble. Mr. Ward may be worse. She is a widow, Eli said. She is an outcast, Gideon snapped. You must cast her out. Let the church see to her. We will find her. Suitable lodging. Maribel knew what suitable lodging meant. It meant the back room of the saloon. It meant Jed Smalls. I will not go back, Maribel said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the preacher's fervor. Gideon turned to her, his eyes blazing. You, woman, are in a state of mortal peril. You are shacked up with a man known for violence, a man who lives apart from God, the butcher's ghost. They call him. You must come with me. You must repent. Repent for what? Maribel said, her voice shaking but growing stronger. For being cold, for being hungry, for not letting Mr. Smalls put his hands on me? The preacher recoiled, shocked at her plainness. I will not go with you. She said. She looked at the staring faces, at the hostile women, at the leering men. She looked at the mud and the filth. Then she looked at Eli, who was watching her, his face impassive. I will stay with Mr. Ward, she said. If I have to burn in hell for wanting peace, then so be it. Reverend Gideon looked as if she had struck him. He held up a hand, as if to ward off a demon. Then you are both lost, he whispered. Do not come to the church for aid. Do not come to this town for comfort. You have made your bed. He turned and stalked away. The ride back to the cabin was silent, but the shame was gone. It had been burned away by the preacher's fire. They were no longer two prisoners. They were two outcasts, allies. That night, they sat by the fire. The cabin felt safe. It felt like a fortress. What he said, Maribel began, twisting her hands in her lap. About me being trouble. Eli looked at the fire. It was just talk. It was not. She said, I must tell you. He waited. Back in Ohio, I was not just left alone. There was a man, my husband's business partner. She was staring at her hands. He was unkind. After my husband passed, he said I owed him. He forced me. Eli's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. He did not speak. One night, she whispered, He came to my room. He was drunk. He tore my dress. I had a knife, a small one, for mending. She looked up, her eyes wide and haunted, meeting his. I stabbed him. Eli, in the shoulder. There was so much blood. I was arrested. She let out a short, sharp breath. The sheriff. He came to my cell. He let me go. He put me on the stagecoach west that night. He gave me the money for the ticket. She looked down again. He told me to run. He told me to never, ever come back. The cabin was silent. He did not believe me, she whispered, the old shame returning. He just wanted me gone, so there would be no trouble for that man. Or maybe he did believe me, and he knew I would not survive a trial. I do not know which is worse. She had laid it all at his feet. The truth, the stabbing, the reason she was cursed. She had given him the knife to cut her loose. Eli Ward was silent for a long time. The fire crackled. The wind moaned softly around the eaves. He stood up. Maribel flinched, expecting him to walk to the door, to tell her to leave, that the preacher was right. He looked down at her. His scarred face was unreadable in the dim light. His gray eyes held hers. I believe you, he said. He said it simply. A statement of fact. As simple and as final as the hammer blows on the coffin. He turned, grabbed his coat, and walked out into the snow. Maribel watched him go. He stood by the fence, his back to the cabin, his shoulders shaking. He was not cold. He was not angry. He was shaking. She sat by the fire, put her head in her hands, and for the first time since she left Ohio, she wept. His words, I believe you, had been a bridge. It was a narrow, rickety thing, slung across the canyon that separated them, but it was enough to walk on. The confession had not driven him away. It had bound him closer. The cabin, once a prison, now felt like the only sane place in Wyoming. The great melt began. It came not as a gentle thaw, but as a muddy, violent breaking. The world, frozen for months, tore itself apart. The snow receded in dirty, ragged patches, revealing the soaked, brown earth beneath. The draw behind the cabin became a roaring, muddy creek. The sound of dripping water was constant, a relentless tapping that replaced the howl of the wind. The land was raw, scarred, and ugly, but it was alive. Maribel felt it in her own bones, a restless, aching need. She took to walking the perimeter of the draw, her boots sinking deep in the mud. She needed to put her hands in the earth. She found a patch of land behind the cabin that caught the morning sun. I want to plant a garden, she told Eli one evening. He was mending a piece of harness, his hands deft and sure. He did not look up. Ground's thin, full of rock. I can clear the rock, she said. It will freeze again, he said. We always get a late blizzard. Then I will cover it. The deer will eat it. Then you will shoot the deer. He finally stopped. He looked at her, at the stubborn set of her jaw. He saw a flicker of the same defiant light she'd had when she faced the preacher. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. There is a spade in the barn, he said, and a small box of seeds. Abernathy left them. Probably no good. He went back to his work. Do not hope too much. She did not care about the hope. She cared about the work. For the next week, she fought the earth. She used the heavy spade, her back screaming in protest. She hauled rocks in her apron until her arms ached. She broke the hard, unforgiving clods of sod with her bare hands. Eli watched her. He never offered to help. He just watched, his face impassive. But one morning, she woke to find the heavy, rusted plowshare from the barn dragged near her patch. He had left it there, an unspoken offering. She used it as a wedge to break the biggest stones. When the small square of land was finally broken, dark and clear, she knelt. She planted the old seeds, beans, squash, and corn. She did not know if they were alive or dead. It did not matter. She patted the earth down, and for the first time in a year, her hands felt like her own. They were not wandering. They were working. With the thaw, the cabin changed. She aired out the blankets, scrubbing them in a bucket of snowmelt and lye soap until her knuckles were raw. The smell of cold smoke and stale fear began to recede. One afternoon, while Eli was out checking the ridge for stray cattle that might have drifted south, she undertook the task of cleaning his corner. It was an invasion, and she knew it, but the dust and the solitude had made her bold. There was a small, rickety desk he never used. It was just a plank on 2 barrels, but it had a single, shallow drawer. She pulled it open. It was filled with cartridges, a broken whetstone, and a small, leather-bound tally book. And beneath it all, a photograph, a tintype, its edges dark. She picked it up. It was a portrait of a boy, perhaps 10 years old. He was wearing a suit that was too large for him, his hair slicked down. He was not smiling. Children in photographs rarely did. He was staring at the camera with a seriousness that was almost adult. And he had Eli's eyes, not the color. The tintype was all grays and blacks, but the shape, the stillness, the quiet, unblinking assessment. It was Eli, before the world had carved the scar into his face. She was still holding it when the door opened. Eli froze. He saw what was in her hand. The air left the cabin. The silence that fell was the old silence, the one that was sharp and cold and full of violence. "Put it down," he said. His voice was flat. "Dead." "Who is he?" she whispered. She did not put it down. "That is my business." "He has your eyes. Eli." He walked to the desk, his boots heavy on the floor. He did not snatch the photo. He simply held out his hand. She looked at his hand, then at his face. The scar on his jaw was pale, his skin tight over the bone. He was breathing, but only just. She placed the tintype in his palm. He stared at it for a full minute. His thumb brushed over the boy's face. "My brother," he said. His voice was a rasp, as if it was being dragged over rocks. "Thomas. We called him Tom." He did not put the photo away. He just kept staring at it. "He is gone," Maribel said. A statement, not a question. "He is dead." Eli's gaze lifted from the photo and went to the far wall. He was not seeing the cabin. "Killed by men I once worked for." He had said, "men I once worked for," not "men who once worked for me." The distinction was everything. He had been one of them. "I was in Cheyenne," he said, his voice hollow, reciting a creed he had said to himself 1,000 times. "I was drinking. I was celebrating a job. A bad job." He closed his eyes. "They sent word. Tom sent word. He said they were coming for the ranch, that the man I worked for, Mr. Harrison, he wanted it all. He wanted the water rights." He opened his eyes. They were empty. "I did not listen. I thought he was just a scared kid. I told him I would handle it when I got back." He set the photo on the desk, very carefully. "By the time I got back, the ranch was smoke, and Tom, they did not just shoot him." He turned away from her, running a hand over his face. "I let it happen. I was too late. I was proud of the company I kept. I was proud of the fear I carried." He looked at his own hands. And he paid for it. He had confessed. It was a confession that dwarfed hers. Hers was a single act of violence, of survival. His was a lifetime of allegiance to the wrong things, a sin of omission that had cost him the only thing in the world he had left. Maribel did not know what to say. There were no words for such a thing. "I am sorry," was a weak, pathetic sound. "I understand," was a lie. So she did the only thing she could. She crossed the 2 feet that separated them. He tensed, expecting a word, a judgment. She reached out and took his hand. It was the first time they had touched skin to skin on purpose, without anger or fear. His hand was rough, calloused, and cold. He flinched, but he did not pull away. His fingers lay stiff and awkward in hers. She just stood there, holding his hand. She did not squeeze. She did not rub. She just held it, a small, warm anchor in the cold, dark room. He did not look at her. He just stared at the wall, but his breathing, which had been shallow and tight, slowly deepened. His fingers, after a long, Long time. Curled, just slightly, around hers. Their intimacy grew quieter after that. It was less desperate. The shame of that night, when she had torn his shirt, was gone. The fear of her nightmares was still there, but it was lessened. They had seen the worst parts of each other, and they were both still standing. They talked more, not about the past, but about the present, about the garden, about the way the mules favored one side, about the price of flour, small, necessary, human things. He slept on the floor, she slept on the bed, but the space between them was no longer a chasm. It was just a room. The peace lasted 2 weeks. It was broken by the sound of hoofbeats. It was a single rider, coming fast. Eli was outside, splitting wood, his back to the trail. Maribel was by her garden patch, pulling weeds. She saw the rider first. "Eli," she said, not loud. He stopped, axe in hand, and turned. The rider pulled up hard. His horse lathered. He was a man Maribel had seen in town, a rancher named Arliss Croft. He was related to the undertaker, but he had none of the man's dry neutrality. Arliss was all mean edges, with a thick beard and eyes that were too close together. He had been one of the men on the mercantile porch, staring at her, his look a mix of hunger and contempt. "Ward," Arliss spat. He kept his hand on his rifle, which was still in its scabbard. "You got a lot of nerve. Staying here." Eli did not move. He just rested the axe head on the ground. "This is my land, Arliss." "It's Harrison's land," Arliss sneered. "And you are a ghost. You should have stayed dead." He looked past Eli, and his eyes settled on Maribel. His gaze was slow, insulting. He took in her dirty apron, the smudge of dirt on her cheek, the way her hair had come loose. "Or maybe," Arliss said, his voice dropping, "you came back for this." He smiled, a wet, ugly flash of teeth. "Got yourself a camp woman. Figures. A broken man for a broken woman. She the reason you did not have the guts to finish what you started?" Eli did not react. His face was stone. He had been called worse. He had been called a coward by this woman, and it had meant more. But Maribel moved. She had been carrying the small mending knife she'd used to stab the man in Ohio. She had taken to keeping it in her apron pocket. It was not a weapon. It was a comfort. It was a weapon now. She took 3 steps, placing herself between Arliss and Eli. The man was on his horse. She was on the ground, but she was looking up at him, and the fear was gone. She pulled the knife. It was a small thing, a 4-inch blade, but the sun caught the steel. "You will get on your horse," she said, her voice low and shaking, but clear as a bell. "And you will ride." Arliss laughed. He laughed, until he saw her eyes. He saw the same thing Eli had seen the night of her nightmare. He saw a woman who was not afraid of breaking. He saw a woman who had already broken, and who had put herself back together with sharp edges. Eli's voice was a low rumble. "Arliss, you need to listen to the lady." The rancher's smile faded. He looked from the small, deadly serious woman with the knife to the man with the axe. Eli had not moved, but his grip on the axe handle had tightened, his knuckles white. "This is not over. Ward!" Arliss snarled. "Harrison has not forgotten, and Luke's kin. They have not forgotten either." He jerked his horse's head around. "You owe blood, and you will pay it." He kicked his horse into a gallop, sending a spray of mud onto Maribel's dress. They stood, unmoving, until he was out of the draw. Maribel looked down at the knife in her hand. It was trembling violently. She let it fall to the mud. Eli took a step, then another. He stopped in front of her. He looked at the mud on her dress. He looked at her pale, shaking face. He reached out, slowly, and put one hand on her shoulder. His touch was heavy, grounding. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, unable to speak. She was shaking apart. "Go inside," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I will finish this." She went, that night. The tension was back, but it was not shame. It was the taut, humming wire of the confrontation. It was the unspent violence. It was the fact that she had drawn a knife for him, and he had let her. They ate dinner in silence. She went to her cot. He went to his spot on the floor. An hour passed. Neither of them slept. "He called me a camp woman," Maribel said into the darkness. "He is a fool." Eli's voice came from the floor. "He is right. That is what I am." "That is what they all see." "I do not see that." "What do you see?" she whispered. He was silent for a long time. "I see you planting a garden. I see you with a knife in your hand, facing a man twice your size. I see the curtains you made." She turned over, looking at his shadow on the floor. "I am cold. Eli?" He did not move. "I am cold," she said again, her voice breaking. "And I am tired of being afraid." He sat up, a dark shape against the faint moonlight from the window. He was just a shadow. He stood, his blanket falling to the floor. He walked to her cot. He stood over her. "This ain't—" he started. "I know what this is," she said. "It is one night. It is two people in a box, trying to stay warm." He sat on the edge of the cot. It sagged under his weight. He did not touch her. "Maribel," he said, and the use of her name was an intimacy all its own. "What I am, it is not good." "I know," she said. She reached out, her hand trembling, and laid it on his arm. His muscles were rigid. "I am not good either." He looked at her hand on his arm. He covered it with his own, slowly, carefully. "This ain't salvation," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "But it is real." "It is real," he agreed. He leaned down. He did not kiss her mouth. He pressed his lips, rough and dry, to her forehead. A benediction, a promise, a surrender. Then, slowly, he lay down on the narrow cot beside her, on top of the blankets. He was fully dressed, boots and all. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. She lay on her side, facing him. He put his arm around her, pulling her against his side. His body was hard, warm. She put her head on his shoulder, fitting herself into the space he made. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart under her ear. It was the loudest thing in the world. They did not speak. They just lay there, breathing. The touch was not about desire. It was about comfort. It was about the end of loneliness. It was about facing Arliss Croft and the preacher and the ghosts of dead brothers and doing it together. After a long time, he spoke, his voice a low rumble in his chest. "I have not—" He stopped. "Your touch, it makes me feel alive again. I thought that was gone." She burrowed closer. "I do not believe in second chances, Eli," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "I do not think God gives them, but maybe I believe in staying warm together until the morning comes." "I can believe in that," he said, and for the first time, in that cabin, they both slept. 2 days later, the mail rider came. He came once a month, if the weather held. He was a skinny kid with a face full of freckles, and he looked at Eli with awe and at Maribel with nervous curiosity. "Got a letter," he said, holding it out. "For Mr. Ephraim Abernathy." Eli took it. "Abernathy is dead." "I know," the kid said. "But the postage is paid, and it came from Cheyenne. Figured his widow might want it." He looked at Maribel. Eli handed him a coin. "Thank you, son. You move on." The kid nodded, relieved, and spurred his horse. Eli stood on the porch, looking at the letter. It was addressed in a clean, sharp hand. Maribel came to the door. "For him? For him," Eli said. He looked at her. He made a decision. He was not going to hide this. He handed it to her. She took it. It was strange. Holding a letter for the man she was supposed to marry, the man who was a rotting box of pine in the ground, she broke the seal. The letter was 1 page. The words were precise. "Mr. Abernathy, your recent passing complicates our arrangement. I trust you left instructions. Your claim on the North Ridge was secured, as you know, through our removal of the Ute problem. The death of those 3 families was necessary for your expansion, And for ours. Maribel's hand began to shake. She read on. My principal, Mr. Harrison, is growing impatient. We hold the original deed and the testimony of the man who burned the homestead. We are prepared to expose the entire land grab scheme and the murders to the territorial marshal. Unless, of course, your heir is prepared to honor your debt. We will take the deed to the North Ridge, or we will take blood. We will be in Junction Creek in 1 month to collect. The letter was unsigned. Maribel read it twice. Her dead groom, the man she had traveled 1,000 miles to marry. He was not a simple rancher. He was a monster. A man who had paid for the murder of 3 native families. And he had used the same man Eli had worked for, Harrison. The past was not just coming for Eli. It was coming for her, too. She had inherited Ephraim Abernathy's land, his name, and now, his sins. She looked at Eli. His face was granite. Harrison, he said. It was not a question. Harrison, she confirmed. He took the letter from her shaking hand. He read it once. His eyes narrowed. He walked to the stove, opened the grate, and dropped the paper onto the coals. They watched it curl, turn black, and disappear into ash. Burning it does not make it untrue, Maribel whispered. No, Eli said, but it is a start. He looked at her, the man who had betrayed his partner, Luke, the man whose brother was dead because of his arrogance, the woman who had stabbed her attacker. They were bound together, not just by loneliness, but by the sins of others. That night, there was no hesitation. The cabin was small. The world was dangerous. He did not go to the floor. He blew out the lamp, took off his boots, and lay down on the narrow bed. Maribel lay down beside him, pulling the blanket over them both. They lay side by side, his arm under her head, her hand on his chest. It was no longer temporary. It was no longer just about staying warm. They were in it, together, and the past was riding down on them, hard. The letter burned, but the ash settled on everything. For a month, they lived in the shadow of that coming date. The intimacy they had found on the narrow cot was no longer a soft, sleepy thing. It was a sharp, watchful alliance. They spoke in low tones. When he went out to hunt, she watched the ridge until he returned. When she worked in her garden, his rifle was never more than a few feet away. Leaning against the cabin wall, they were waiting. The garden, against all his warnings, began to grow. Small, stubborn green shoots pushed up through the cold mud. Maribel would kneel by them, her hands in the dirt, as if she could protect them. It was a foolish hope. They both knew it. The peace broke on a Tuesday. The air was clear, and the sun was a weak, watery yellow. Maribel was weeding her small, brave patch of beans when she saw the riders. Not one. This time, 4. Eli, she said, her voice flat. He was splitting the last of the winter wood. He did not stop his motion. The axe came down, thwack, splitting the log. He set the axe down, wiped his hands on his trousers, and turned. The riders were led by Sheriff Hake. He was a thick man with a weary face and a tobacco-stained mustache. He looked at Eli, at the cabin, and then at Maribel. His eyes were not unkind. They were just tired. Eli, Hake said, his voice a low rumble. Ma'am. Sheriff. Eli said. He stood in front of the cabin door, his body a quiet barrier. Maribel came and stood beside him, wiping her muddy hands on her apron. I'm not here for you, Eli, the sheriff said, which was worse. He looked at Maribel. I'm here for you, ma'am. I got a telegraph. Came all the way from Ohio, about a stabbing. Maribel felt the blood drain from her face. The dirt under her feet felt unsteady. The past, the one she had buried under 1,000 miles of trail, had just clawed its way out. It was self-defense, she said, her voice a reedy whisper. I am sure it was, Hake said, and he sounded like he meant it. And the sheriff back there, a man I know, he was inclined to agree. He buried the warrant. Then what is the problem? Eli asked, his voice flat. The problem, Hake sighed, taking off his hat and wiping his brow, is that the man she stabbed did not forget. He is rich, he has friends, and we have a new territorial marshal. He's not like the old stock. He is a reformer, a man from back east. He is digging up every old warrant, every unsolved crime. He wants to make Wyoming civilized. The sheriff put his hat back on. He will be in Junction Creek in 2 days. He already has the paperwork on you, ma'am. He knows your name. If he finds you here, I have to arrest you, and you will be put on a train back to Ohio. And from what I hear about the man you stabbed, you will not survive the trial. They will hang you. Maribel looked at her garden, the small green shoots. What do you want me to do? She asked. I want you to leave, Huck said, not unkindly. I am giving you a choice. Be gone by sundown tomorrow. Head north, head south. I do not care. If you are gone, I can tell the marshal you were never here. I can say the warrant was a mistake. I can lose the paperwork. But if you are here, I will have to take you. He looked at Eli. Keep her out of sight. I have done what I can. The sheriff nodded, turned his horse, and the posse rode away, leaving a thick, heavy silence in their wake. Maribel sank down onto the small bench by the door. She put her face in her hands. She had been so careful. She had run so far. Eli was silent for a long time. He went into the cabin. She heard him moving around. He came back out with his saddlebags. He began checking the leather straps. We will pack, he said, his voice calm. We can head north, into the high country. We can cross the mountains, lose ourselves. They will never find us there. He was going with her. He was willing to give up his land, his cabin, his entire life, and run. For her. The weight of it, the simple, absolute loyalty, was heavier than the sheriff's threat. She lifted her head. No. He stopped working the leather. What do you mean? No. Maribel, this is not a request. They will hang you. I know, she said, standing up. And I ran before. I ran from him in Ohio. I ran from the stairs in Junction Creek. I ran all the way here. She walked to her garden patch, her small, impossible square of hope. I will not run again, she said. Not this time. This is my home. This is not a home. Eli's voice was sharp, a crack in his careful calm. It is a box of wood on a patch of dirt. We can find another. It is not the dirt, she said, turning to face him. Her voice was shaking, but it was strong. It is the standing still. If I run now, I will never stop running. I will be that girl, the one who is always looking over her shoulder, for the rest of my life. It is better than being dead. Is it? She asked. You lived like that, hiding here. Was that living? That hit him. He had no answer. I will not let that man in Ohio. She continued. Or that preacher, or that new marshal, or Harrison. I will not let them push me out. I did nothing wrong. I lived. That is all. I just lived. You stabbed a man, he said, his voice low. Yes, she said. I did, and I would do it again. I will not be ashamed, and I will not run. They stood, facing each other. A man who had run all his life, and a woman who had just decided to stop. The impasse was absolute. He wanted to protect her body. She was trying to save her soul. The argument was stillborn, hanging in the air, when they heard the new riders. It was late afternoon. The sun was slanting, casting long, ugly shadows. 3 men. Arliss Croft was in the lead. He had 2 men with him, strangers with hard, empty faces. They were not law. They were the kind of men Harrison hired. Well, Arliss sneered, pulling his horse to a stop. He saw Eli's saddlebags on the porch. Looks like the sheriff already gave you your walking papers. Ward, we are just here to help you pack. This was not about the sheriff. This was about the letter. This was Harrison's answer. This is not your fight, Arliss, Eli said. He moved, slowly, to put himself between Arliss and Maribel. It is now, Arliss spat. Harrison wants this land, the land your woman inherited from that old bastard Abernathy, and I want to finish what we started. For Luke. He dismounted. The other two men fanned out. This is your last chance. Ward. Arliss said, get on your horse, take your woman, and ride, or be buried here. This is my land. Eli said, wrong answer. It was fast. Arliss was a brawler. He lunged, not at Eli, but at Maribel. Eli moved to intercept, and the other two men were on him. It was 3-1. Eli was a sharpshooter, a man of distance. This was close. Ugly work. One man grabbed his arms, the other drove a fist into his stomach. Eli grunted. The air punched out of him. Arliss laughed and turned back to Eli, drawing a pistol from his belt. No, not a gun, Arliss said to himself. This one is for Luke. He dropped the pistol and drove his fist into Eli's face. Eli staggered, but the man held him. He could not fight back. Maribel screamed. She looked around, desperate. The axe, it was too far. The rifle was inside. She saw the pile of stove wood she had helped Eli stack. She grabbed a heavy piece of split oak. One of the men holding Eli saw her coming. Arliss! She swung the log with all the strength in her body. It connected with the side of the man's head with a sickening, wet crack. His eyes rolled back, and he dropped like a sack. Her knuckles, scraped raw on the wood, began to bleed. The other man let Eli go. Turning on her, Eli, free, drove his elbow into Arliss's gut. The man lunged for Maribel. She tried to swing the log again, but he was too fast. He grabbed her, his hands like vices, and threw her to the ground. She landed hard on the rocky dirt, the breath knocked out of her. You'll pay for that, you crazy witch, he snarled. He turned back to help Arliss, who was now trading blows with Eli. Eli was hurt. Slow. Arliss was bigger, angrier. Maribel scrambled, crawling, pushing herself to her feet. She ran into the cabin. That is right, run, Arliss yelled, landing a blow to Eli's ribs that made him cry out. Maribel came back out. She was not running. She was carrying Eli's rifle. She was shaking so hard she could barely hold it, but she levered a round into the chamber. The shick-shick of the action was the loudest sound in the world. Everyone froze. The man she had hit was groaning on the ground. The other two stood over Eli, who was on one knee, spitting blood. Get away from him, Maribel said. Her voice was a thin, high tremor. Arliss Croft actually laughed. You ain't got the nerve, girlie. He took a step toward Eli. The world exploded in fire and smoke. Maribel had pulled the trigger. The shot was wild, aimed from fear. Not skill, but it was not that wild. The bullet tore a line of fire along Arliss's cheekbone, ripping through the flesh and taking a piece of his ear. He screamed, a high, thin sound, stumbling back, clutching his face. Blood poured through his fingers. The other man stared, his face white with shock. Maribel was reloading. Her hands were trembling, but she was doing it. I said, get away! You shot me! Arliss shrieked, his voice full of disbelief. You crazy! What in God's name is going on here? It was Sheriff Hake. He had returned, this time alone. He must have forgotten something, or had second thoughts. He took in the scene in one sweeping glance. One man on the ground, holding his head. Eli, beaten, on one knee. Arliss Croft, bleeding from the face. And Maribel, wild-eyed, blood on her knuckles, holding a smoking rifle. Arliss saw his chance. Sheriff, thank God! She tried to kill me! Look at my face! She shot me! For no reason! She is unhinged! He is lying, Maribel cried. They attacked us! They were beating him! Eli staggered to his feet. Hake! It was 3-on-1. They came for the land. Sheriff Hake looked at Arliss. He looked at Eli. Then he looked at Maribel, and his face hardened. He had a problem, and she had just become the solution. That is it, Hake said, his voice full of a sudden, cold authority. I tried to give you a chance, ma'am. I tried. What are you talking about? She said. All I see, Hake said, his voice rising, is a man on the ground, Mr. Croft bleeding, and you with a rifle. You are unstable, just like the report from Ohio said. Assault, firing a weapon with intent. I cannot let you run. I have to hold you for the marshal. You are taking his side, Eli spat, blood a red froth on his lips. I am taking the side of peace, Eli, the sheriff said, pulling his pistol. And this woman, she is a menace. He nodded at Arliss. You, get on your horse. Get to the dock. Your friend, too. Then he pointed his gun at Maribel. Drop the rifle, now! Maribel looked at him. She looked at Eli. She saw the trap close. She slowly, carefully, set the rifle on the ground. I am taking her in, Hake said. He pulled out a pair of cuffs. She made her choice. No, Eli said, taking a step. Hake cocked the pistol. Do not be a fool. Eli, it is over. She is going to jail. You try to stop me, and I will add resisting arrest to her charges. Or I will shoot you. Either way, she loses. Eli stopped. He was broken, beaten. He watched, his eyes full of a terrible, cold fire. As the sheriff cuffed Maribel's hands in front of her, he watched as Hake pulled her toward his horse and pushed her up onto the saddle. Eli, she cried. He did not answer. He just watched her go. The jail was a single, filthy room with 2 cells. Hake pushed her into one and locked the door. The sun was setting. The room grew cold. She sat on the straw-ticked mattress, her bloody knuckles pressed to her mouth. Hours passed. She heard the town go quiet. Then, a sound. Eli was standing in the dark office, outside the bars. His face was a ruin. His left eye was swollen shut, his lips split. He must have taped his own ribs, because he was standing stiffly, his breath shallow. Eli, she whispered, you are hurt. I will live, he said, his voice thick and low. He moved closer to the bars. Maribel, I will get you out. No. The word was a sob. No, do not you see? This is what they want. This is Harrison's plan. They use Arliss to provoke me. They use the sheriff to lock me up. They want you to do something foolish. You try to break me out. They will hang you too. They will have the land. They will have everything. I will not let you rot in here. The marshal will be here tomorrow. Then you must be gone, she pleaded, gripping the bars. Promise me, Eli, please, go, run, save yourself. Do not let them take you, too. Your life, it is all I have. I am not leaving you, he said. It was a vow. Promise me, she begged, tears streaming down her face. You cannot fight them. Do not die for me. He looked at her, his one good eye, gray and cold. Finding hers in the dark, he did not promise. He reached through the bars and touched her bloody knuckles with his trembling fingers. This is not just your fight anymore, he said. It is mine. He turned and limped out of the jail, disappearing into the night. Eli did not go to his horses. He walked, keeping to the shadows. He knew he could not win with guns, not against Harrison and Hake and a territorial marshal. He needed leverage. He needed a truth sharp enough to cut them all. He thought of the letter. He thought of Arliss. This one is for Luke. Luke Croft, Arliss's brother, the man Eli had worked with. Under Harrison, the man he had betrayed. He walked to the edge of town, to a small, dark cabin that sagged under the weight of its own neglect. He knocked. A woman opened the door, a lamp in her hand. Sarah Croft, Luke's widow. She was thin and gray, worn down by grief. When she saw Eli's broken face in the lamplight, she gasped and tried to slam the door. Get off my land, Eli Ward, she hissed, or I will shoot you myself. He put his boot in the door. Sarah, please, I am not here to fight. You are a ghost, she spat. You should be dead. Luke is dead, because of you. Yes, he said, and the simple agreement stopped her. He is because of me, and because of Harrison. And Harrison is doing it again. What do I care? He is coming for my land, Eli said. He is using the law to take it. He has my woman, Maribel, in the jail. He is going to let her hang, the same way he set Luke up. She hesitated. Luke was no saint. He worked for Harrison. So did you. I know, Eli said, his voice raw. I know what we were. But Luke, he wanted out. He knew Harrison was going to kill those Ute families for the North Ridge. He was going to expose him. And you ran, she whispered, her voice full of old poison. Harrison gave the order. And you, his partner, you ran. You let them kill him. I did, Eli confessed, the words tearing out of him. I ran, just like I did with my brother. I was a coward, and Luke died for it, and I have lived with that. He looked at her, his one good eye pleading. Now Harrison is doing it to me. He is taking my land, and he is going to kill that woman. Sarah, I need proof. I cannot let him win again. She stared at him for a long, hard minute. She saw the man who had betrayed her husband, but she also saw a man who was as broken as she was. And she hated Harrison more than she hated him. Luke was not a fool, she said, her voice a low growl. He knew Harrison would turn on him. He kept things. She turned from the door, went to a small, cold hearth. She pulled a loose stone, reached inside. She came back with a small, oilcloth-wrapped bundle. He kept this, she said. She handed him a torn piece of paper. It is half of the original deed to the North Ridge. Before Harrison forged the new one, it has the real signature. And she handed him another, smaller slip of paper. This is the name. The name of the man Harrison paid to burn the homestead. The man who killed those families. Luke was going to take this to the marshal. Eli looked at the paper. It was the leverage he needed. The deed and a name. He is a drunk, she said, lives in Cheyenne. But he talks. Luke knew he would talk. Eli folded the papers, put them inside his shirt. Thank you, Sarah. Do not thank me, she said, her face hard. I am not doing this for you. I am doing it for Luke. I am doing it so that man, Harrison, burns for what he did. She looked at his beaten face. Now get off my land. Eli nodded. He left. He did not go toward Cheyenne. He did not have time. The marshal was coming. He went back to the jail. It was deep night. The town was dead. A single lamp burned in the sheriff's office. The deputy was asleep at the desk, his boots up, his hat over his face. Eli moved like he was trained to, a shadow. The enforcer. He did not have a gun. He did not need one. He moved past the sleeping man. The keys were on a hook by the door. He took them. The scrape of the key in the lock was impossibly loud. Maribel shot up from the cot. She saw him. Eli, no, I told you, they will kill you. He swung the cell door open. Get your shawl, he whispered. We are leaving. No, she begged, tears streaming down her face. Please, Eli, do not do this. You will die for me. He did not argue. He did not plead. He stepped into the cell, grabbed her arm, and pulled her close. His swollen, broken face was inches from hers. His one good eye was blazing with a light she had never seen. I am already dying without you, he said, his voice a raw, broken rasp. I died 10 years ago when Tom was killed. I died every day in that cabin, alone. You are the only thing. I am not leaving you. She stopped. She stopped crying. She just stared at him. It was the truest thing anyone had ever said. Now, come on, he said. She nodded. They slipped out of the cell, out of the office. The deputy snored. Eli had their horses stashed in the alley behind the livery. He helped her mount, his ribs screaming in protest. He swung up onto his own. They did not run. They walked the horses, quiet as ghosts, out of Junction Creek. Once they cleared the last building, he kicked his horse. Ride! They fled. Hard. Not back to the cabin. That was the first place Hake would look. They rode north, into the dark, unforgiving ridges of the high hills. They rode for an hour, the horses breathing hard. As they cleared the last ridge, the wind shifted. It turned in an instant, coming from the north, and it was no longer a spring breeze. It was a knife. It was bitter cold. Maribel pulled her shawl tight. Eli, she said, her voice stolen by the sudden gust. He looked at the sky. It was dark, but he could see the clouds, low and heavy and moving fast. The first flakes began to fall. They were not soft flakes. They were small, hard pellets of ice, a late spring blizzard. "Keep riding," Eli yelled over the rising shriek of the wind. "We have to find cover, now!" They were fugitives from the law, fugitives from a killer, and now they were prisoners of the sky. The wind did not have a voice. It was a physical, solid thing, a wall of ice and noise that hit them the moment they cleared the ridge. The late spring blizzard was a betrayal, a final, cruel joke from a land that wanted them dead. "Eli!" Maribel cried, her voice torn from her mouth. "I cannot see." He was just a shape ahead of her. His back bowed. His horse was struggling, sinking to its hocks in the fast-drifting snow. Eli was hurt, his beaten body moving stiffly, his breath a white plume of pain. He pulled his horse around, grabbing her reins. "There is a shack!" he yelled over the scream of the wind. "An old trapper's cabin. In the next draw. We have to make it." It was not a ride. It was a fight. They pushed the horses through the blinding white, every step a lurching, sinking agony. Maribel's hands were numb, frozen to the leather. She could feel the cold seeping through her wool dress, through her skin, settling in her bones. Just as she thought she would fall, just as the cold began to feel like a warm, terrible sleep, Eli pulled them to a stop, a shape, a shadow in the white. It was not a cabin. It was a pile of sod and logs, half buried, a crumbling chimney stack leaning against the wind. He half fell, half jumped from his horse, pulling her down after him. The animals, sensing shelter, pushed against the small structure. Eli kicked the frozen plank door. It flew open, revealing a square of absolute darkness. He pushed her inside. "The horses! Let them!" she gasped. "They will stay by the wall." He stumbled back in, pulling the door shut, plunging them into a suffocating, frozen blackness. The sound of the wind dropped from a scream to a low, vibrating moan, rattling the very dirt around them. "A match!" Eli grunted, his voice tight with pain. "Saddlebags." She fumbled with his bags, her fingers wooden and useless. She found the tin box. She struck one. It flared and died. A second. It caught. In the small, flickering light, she saw their prison. It was a hole. A single room, dug into the hillside. Not 10 feet square. A rusted, broken stove in the corner. A low cot of rough planks. A pile of wood scraps and brush near the stove. It smelled of rat droppings, old rot, and profound despair. Eli was on his knees by the stove. He took the match, his hands shaking, and lit the small pile of tinder. Slowly, painfully, the brush caught. He added a larger piece of wood. The fire was small, smoky, and pathetic, but it was fire. They huddled over it, not speaking, for an hour. The snow piled against the door, sealing them in. The first day was about survival. The second day was about patience. By the third day, it was about madness. The food was gone. Eli had packed jerky and a handful of hardtack for his escape. It was meant for one man for one day. They ate the last of it on the second morning, washed down with melted snow that tasted of rust. The firewood ran low. The small pile was all they had. Eli broke up the rotted plank cot, feeding it to the stove piece by piece. The fire was the only thing holding the cold back, and it was dying. "We are going to die here," Maribel said. It was the third day. The wind had not stopped. Her voice was flat, empty. "We are not," Eli said. He was pacing. 3 steps, turn, 3 steps. His beaten face was a mask of purple and black, his good eye burning in the dim light. His ribs were on fire. "You should have left me," she said. "You should have run." "Stop talking," he said. "This is not freedom, Eli. This is just a different cage, a smaller one." She looked at the dying embers in the stove. "We saved them the trouble of a rope." I said, "Stop it," he snapped, his voice cracking. He kicked the stove. "We are alive. We are free. That is all that matters." "Free?" She stood up, her small frame vibrating with a cold, desperate anger. "Free to freeze? Free to starve? I should have stayed. I should have faced the marshal. At least it would have been fast. At least it would have been justice. That was not justice, he roared. That was a lynching, arranged by Harrison. You were a fool for not running. And you are a coward for always running, she screamed back at him. The words hit him like a physical blow. He stopped pacing. He stared at her. The silence in the tiny cabin was absolute, save for the wind. He had run from the war. He had run from Harrison. He had run from his brother's death. He had run from her, in his own cabin, sleeping on the floor. And he had run from the jail. She was right. The anger drained out of her, leaving her hollow. She sank onto the packed earth floor. We are going to die, she whispered. And it is all for nothing. He looked at her, this small, broken woman who had faced down a preacher and drawn a knife and fired a rifle. He looked at her, and the wall he had kept around his heart for 10 years finally crumbled to dust. He crossed the small space and knelt in front of her. He was in agony from his ribs, but he knelt. He took her frozen hands. Then we will die warm, he said. He pulled her up and led her to the last of their blankets, spread on the floor. He lay down, pulling her with him. The fire was a handful of red coals, offering no heat. The cold of the earth was seeping into their bones. They did not make love. It was not that. It was something more desperate. It was a final, frantic clinging. It was a press of cold lips, a tangle of limbs under the coarse wool, a desperate sharing of heat. It was two people, at the end of everything, choosing to face the dark, not as two, but as one. It was a promise, sealed in the dark, that they would not let go. Afterward, they lay in silence. The wind moaned. The cold was a real, physical presence. Maribel was crying, soft, silent tears that ran into her hair. This, she whispered, her voice thick. This is not what I deserved. Eli tensed, thinking she meant him. I deserved a garden, she said, her voice breaking. I deserved a clean floor. I deserved peace, just to be left alone. She turned her head, pressing her face into his shoulder. This is not what I deserve, but it is what I want. This, you, even this, I want it. He held her, his heart a painful, aching knot in his chest. He had given her nothing but trouble, and she was grateful. Maribel, he whispered. I have to tell you, she said, her voice muffled. I lied. About Ohio. He waited. The man I stabbed. He did not die. Eli went very still. He was rich, important. He came to the jail, the sheriff. He did not just let me go. He made a deal. The man, Mr. Harris. He paid the sheriff. He bought my freedom. She was shaking now, the confession pouring out. He did not let me go. He owned me. He said I owed him my life. He kept me in his house, as a maid. He wanted me to know I had not won. He touched me whenever he wanted. He wanted me to know I was not a person, that I was a thing he had purchased. Eli's hand clenched in the blanket. The urge to kill, the old red feeling he had gotten from the war, rose in him, choking him. I stayed for 2 months, she whispered, until I could not breathe. One night, I took the money he kept in his desk, all of it, and I ran. I just ran. I bought a ticket for the mail-order bride. It was the farthest place I could find. She pulled back, looking at him in the dark. So you see, the sheriff back there, he was not protecting me. He was covering for Mr. Harris. He wanted me gone so his own crime would not be found out. That warrant, it is real. I am not just a victim. Eli, I am a thief. I am whatever he says I am. She had laid her final, darkest secret at his feet. She was not just a woman who had defended herself. She was a woman who had been broken, owned, and had fled as a criminal. Eli held her face between his rough, calloused hands. His swollen eye was closed, but his good one, gray and clear, held hers. I told you, he said, his voice a low, rough growl. I believe you. He took a ragged breath. Now, I will tell you, my brother, Tom, I was not just too late. He told her. He told her about coming back from the war. Hollowed out. Empty. With one skill left. Sharpshooting. The clean, cold, distant mathematics of killing. I liked it, he confessed, the words tasting like poison. I was good at it, but Harrison, he paid me to be good at it. I was his enforcer. I liked the fear I saw in men's eyes. I thought it made me strong. He closed his eye. Tom, he saw what I was. He saw the rot. He begged me to leave. He said Harrison was a snake. He said the men I rode with were animals. I called him a child. I told him to stay out of men's business. The pain in his voice was older and deeper than his broken ribs. When Harrison gave the order to clear the North Ridge, to burn out those Ute families, I knew it was murder. Luke Croft knew it, Tom knew it, and I did not stop it. I told myself it was not my fight. I took the money Harrison offered and I rode to Cheyenne. I got drunk. By the time I came back, Luke was dead, and Harrison sent men to my ranch to silence him, to make sure I knew who was boss. He could not say it. I was a killer. I was proud of it. I thought I had earned hell. I never thought they would make him pay for my sins. He was shaking. The confession was out. The core of his guilt. He was not just a failed protector. He was an accomplice. Maribel looked at this broken man, this killer, this coward, this brave, gentle soul. She saw herself. They were the same, both branded, both guilty, both survivors. She took his hand, the one that had killed, and pressed it to her chest, over her own frantically beating heart. Then we burned together, she whispered. They fell into a black, exhausted sleep, wrapped around each other, the last embers in the stove turning to cold gray ash. The silence woke them. It was not the silence of the blizzard. It was the silence of a world reborn. The wind was gone. A weak, watery sunlight was streaming through a crack in the door. The storm had passed. They were alive. They were frozen. They were starving, but they were alive. Eli sat up, his body screaming in protest. He looked at Maribel. The choice was clear. They could run, deeper into the mountains, and die of starvation. Or they could go back. He will be there, Eli said. The marshal. I know, Maribel said. She was sitting up, pulling her shawl tight. The fire was dead. The cold was absolute. They will hang you, he said. They will hang us, she corrected. We broke jail. She looked at him, her eyes hollow but fierce. I told you, Eli, I am done running. Are you? He looked at her, at the strength that had been buried under all that fear. She had faced her truth. Now he had to face he had the deed from Sarah. He had the name. Running was what he had always done. It had cost him his brother. It had cost Luke Croft his life. No, he said, the word a scrape in his throat. I am not running. He stood, his body a map of pain, and pulled on his boots. Let's go. They rode back into Junction Creek like two ghosts. The town was covered in a foot of wet, spring snow. The sun was bright, blinding. Townsfolk were out, shoveling, staring as the two fugitives rode, slow and deliberate, down the main street. They did not look like jailbreakers. They looked like judgment. They stopped in front of the sheriff's office. Sheriff Hake came out. He was not alone. With him was a man in a clean, dark suit, with a hard, city face and cold eyes. The marshal. Eli Ward, Maribel Thompson, the marshal said, his voice crisp. You are under arrest for escaping custody, assault, and you are arresting the wrong people, Eli said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the cold air. A crowd was gathering. Men stopped shoveling. Women came onto their porches. You are arresting us, Eli continued, while you are protecting him. Harrison. Hake's face went pale. The marshal stiffened. I have proof, Eli said. He reached into his shirt, passed the tape on his ribs, and pulled out the folded papers Sarah Croft had given him. I have proof that Ephraim Abernathy, This woman's dead groom conspired with Harrison to murder 3 Ute families to get the land on the North Ridge. I have the original deed." A gasp went through the crowd. "And I have the name," Eli said, his voice getting stronger, "of the man Harrison paid to do it, the same man who murdered Luke Croft to keep him quiet." "Lies!" a voice shouted. Reverend Gideon pushed through the crowd, his face purple with outrage. "These are the lies of a killer, the slanders of a fallen woman. She broke from jail. She shot Arliss Croft. She must be judged. The law demands it." "He is not lying." The voice was thin, trembling, but it silenced the preacher. Sarah Croft, Luke's widow, stepped out from the crowd. She was wrapped in a black shawl, her face gaunt. "It is the truth," she said, her voice shaking but finding its power. "My husband, he knew what Harrison was. He knew about Abernathy. He was going to talk, and they killed him for it." She looked at the crowd, her neighbors, her friends. This town buried its sins. It buried my Luke. It buried those families on the ridge. It buried Eli's brother." She looked at the marshal. "Let them stay buried, but do not bury these 2 for telling the truth." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. The town was holding its breath. The marshal looked at Hake. Hake looked at the papers in Eli's hand. He was trapped. Maribel slid off her horse. Her legs would barely hold her. She was shaking, not from cold, but from a terror that was so great it was almost calm. She walked into the center of the street, between the law and the crowd. "I am guilty," she said, her voice clear. "I broke out of your jail, and I shot Arliss Croft when he was beating Mr. Ward, and I stabbed a man in Ohio who tried to hurt me." She looked at the marshal. "I am here. I am done running. I am here for judgment." Eli dismounted, his movements stiff. He limped to her side. He stood next to her, so close their shoulders touched. He looked at the marshal, at Hake, at the crowd. "If she hangs," Eli said, his voice flat, "I hang with her." They stood together, outcasts, criminals, survivors, ready. The marshal was furious. His clean, Eastern law was being undone by this messy, Western truth. He had jailbreakers, yes, but he also had a land war, a conspiracy, and a triple murder laid at his feet. The crowd was not with him. They were with the widow. Sheriff Hake hesitated. He looked at Eli and Maribel. He saw their beaten faces, their exhaustion. He saw the way they stood together, unbending. He saw Sarah Croft, a living monument to the town's guilt. He saw the preacher, who wanted a burning, and the marshal, who wanted a rule book. And he made a choice. He turned his back on them. It was a deliberate, final gesture. "You have got till dawn," he said, his voice a low growl. "You and your woman. You get out of Junction Creek. You get out of Wyoming, and you do not ever come back." "Sheriff," the marshal protested, "you cannot just—" "It is my town," Hake said, cutting him off. "My jail, my prisoner." The jailbreak. They served their time in that blizzard. The shooting. Arliss Croft is already wanted for assault, along with his friends. And that Ohio warrant. He shrugged. "It seems to have gotten lost in the storm." He looked at Eli. "Dawn." Reverend Gideon raised his hands. "This is not justice. This is a mockery." "It is what we have," Sarah Croft said, her voice quiet. The crowd began to move. They did not cheer. They did not offer a hand, but they parted. They moved aside, creating a path, a silent, weary, understanding path. From the center of the street to the trail leading west, no one cheered, but no one raised a gun. No one spoke. Eli took Maribel's arm. He helped her mount her horse. He pulled himself into his own saddle, his body screaming. They turned their horses. Not looking back, they rode, slow and steady, through the lane of silent, watching people, and did not stop until the town was just another scar in the snow behind them. They did not look back. To look back was to invite the ghosts, and they had too many of their own. They rode west, out of Junction Creek, two beaten, exhausted figures against a vast, indifferent canvas of wet snow. Eli rode slumped, his body a symphony of pain. His ribs were afire, his face a swollen, tender ruin. Maribel rode straight, her back rigid, her hands cuffed by a phantom ache, her knuckles still raw. The silence of the crowd followed them, a heavy, pressing weight. Long after the town had disappeared, they rode past the familiar ridges, past the gray sagebrush plains that had been her prison. They followed the slow, brown meltwater of the rivers. They skirted the high passes, Eli's knowledge of the land guiding them through cuts and valleys no lawman would think to check. They moved past long-abandoned mines, their dark mouths whispering of other men's failed hopes. They were not running. Not anymore. To run, you must have a destination, or a pursuer. They had neither. They were simply leaving. They were shedding Wyoming like a snake sheds a skin it has outgrown. For a week, they spoke little. They ate what Eli could catch. A few rabbits, a skinny grouse. He was quiet, his face healing into a map of new scars. But the old, haunted look was still there, tempered now by a weary watchfulness. He was no longer just guarding her. He was guarding them. She cared for his wounds as best she could, her touch light, practical. She tore strips from her one spare dress to make clean bandages. He let her. They crossed into Colorado territory. The land changed. The mountains grew sharper, the air thinner. The sky seemed a deeper, more violent blue. They were higher here, closer to the sun and farther from the memory of men. They were looking for a place that did not want them, a place that no one had claimed, or fought for, or died on. They found it after 3 weeks of riding. It was a high mountain valley, a small, level patch of land tucked between 2 granite shoulders. The soil was thin, the wind was constant. It was a place no rancher would covet, too small for cattle, too high for a real crop. But a river ran through it, a fast, clean ribbon of water that tasted of stone and snow. And it was hidden. It was a place no one would find by accident. Eli pulled his horse to a stop. He sat in his saddle, just looking. Maribel rode up beside him. She looked at the thin grass, the stands of pine and aspen, the clean, rushing water. "It is high," she said. "The winters will be hard," he said, "but the water is clean," she replied. He looked at her. Her face was thinner than when she arrived in Wyoming, but her eyes were not hollow. They were clear. "We can build here," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "We can." They built their life with their bare hands. They had 1 axe, 2 horses, and the rifle. They had no money, no help, no neighbors. The first task was the cabin. Eli, his ribs still a dull throb, his old wounds from the war aching in the thin air, went into the aspen grove. He was a sharpshooter, not a logger, but he learned. The thwack of his axe was the first human sound to claim the valley. It was a slow, painful process. He would swing until the pain in his side made him stop, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He would rest, his back against a tree, and then he would stand, and he would swing again. He limped. The beating Arliss had given him, combined with the old, tearing scar along his ribs, had left him with a permanent, dragging hitch in his side. Maribel worked beside him. She could not fell the trees, but she could trim the branches. She could drag the smaller logs. She used the horses to haul the heavy ones. She gathered stones for the foundation. Her hands, which had once been soft, becoming calloused and strong. She found a clay deposit by the river and spent days, covered in mud, fashioning a crude mortar to chink the logs. They worked from sunup to sundown. They did not talk of the past. They spoke of the cabin. "This log is not straight. We need more clay. The roof needs a steeper pitch for the snow." They were too tired for ghosts. The cabin rose, log by painful log. It was smaller than his old one. It was rougher. The floor was packed earth. But when they finally laid the last roof beam, they stood back, 2 small, dirty figures, and looked at what they had made. It was not a box. It was not a prison. It was a shelter. It was theirs. While he finished the roof, she turned to the earth. She found a spot near the river, protected by a stand of willow. The soil was thin, just as he had warned at the old place, but she did not care. She built a low wall of stones to block the wind. She used the spade, the one he had strapped to his saddle when they fled, and she broke the ground. She had no seeds. Eli saw her, kneeling by the empty, waiting patch of dirt. He said nothing. He rode out one morning, his face set, and was gone for 3 days. Maribel did not panic. She did not pace. She chinked the cabin walls. She hauled water. She waited. He had said, "I am not leaving you." She believed him. He returned on the 3rd evening, his saddlebags heavy. He was exhausted, his limp more pronounced. He had ridden to a mining camp, 50 miles south, and traded a week's worth of hunted meat for supplies. He dropped a sack at her feet, flour, salt, coffee, and a small cloth bundle. She opened it. Seeds, beans, squash, and a small paper of wildflower seeds. She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the twilight. He looked away, embarrassed, moving to tend to his horse. It was all they had. He grumbled. She knelt by her garden, and this time, as she planted, she hummed. It was a low, tuneless sound, the sound of a woman who was putting down roots. Their life found its rhythm. The cabin, once just a structure, became a home. She made curtains again, this time from a clean flour sack. He built a real table, and 2 chairs that did not wobble. He built a bed frame against the far wall, wide enough for 2. At night, they lay close. The past was still there. It would always be. It was a 3rd person in the bed, a cold shape at their backs. But they no longer faced it. They faced each other. They did not speak of Harrison, or Hake, or the man from Ohio. They spoke of tomorrow. "I need to fix that fence for the horses," he would murmur into the darkness, his voice rough with sleep. "The beans are sprouting," she would whisper back. "I think the corn will, too." He was a quiet man, a man who had used silence as a shield for so long. He had almost forgotten how to lower it. His guilt, his profound belief that he had earned hell, had made him grim. He did not know how to be light. Maribel showed him. She, who had seen so little to laugh at, found it in their new life. She laughed when one of the horses stole a piece of hardtack from his pocket. She laughed when a blue jay scolded him from a pine branch. At first, he would just watch her, a strange, pinched look on his face. Then, one day, she was trying to haul a bucket of water from the river, slipped on a slick rock, and sat down hard in the icy mud. She looked so surprised, so utterly undignified, that she burst out laughing, and Eli laughed with her. It was a terrible sound, a dry, rusty, unused sound, like a hinge breaking. It startled them both. He stopped, his face turning red under his weather-beaten skin. She stared at him, and then her smile widened. "You should do that more," she said. He did, slowly, over the months. The rust fell away. He found a new voice, one that was not just for commands or confessions. Hay, in turn, gave her a different kind of strength. He had watched her fire that rifle, her body shaking, her eyes closed in terror. "You need to learn," he said one clear afternoon. "I know how," she said, bristling. "No," he said, not unkindly. "You know how to be afraid. I will teach you how to aim." He took her out. He set up a row of pine cones on a log. He taught her how to stand, how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger, not pull it, how to see the target, and only the target. Her first shot missed entirely. Her second chipped the log. "Again," he said, his voice calm, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Breathe. Do not think. Just see." Her third shot sent a pine cone spinning into the air. She looked at him, her eyes wide. He nodded, a small, proud smile touching his scarred mouth. She was no longer a victim with a weapon. She was a woman with a skill. They grew together. The old scars, his and hers, did not fade. They simply became part of their shared story. She would trace the long, ropey mark on his ribs, no longer with fear, but with a sad, quiet tenderness. He would hold her when the nightmares came, not standing apart, but pulling her close until her breathing matched his. They were two broken halves, not making a whole, but fitting together, their jagged edges finding a new, shared shape. One afternoon, in the late summer, Maribel was unpacking the last of her valise. At the bottom was the small, flannel-wrapped bundle, the silver mirror. She unwrapped it. She had not looked at it since that first, terrible day in his cabin. She held it up. The woman who stared back was not the hollow, haunted creature from Junction Creek. This woman's face was browned by the sun. Her hair was sun-bleached. There were lines at the corners of her eyes. Her hands, holding the mirror, were chapped and strong, the nails broken from the garden. She looked real. She looked like she belonged to the earth. She stared at the chipped edge, at the worn plating. She thought of the woman who had needed this, the woman who had checked her reflection to see if she was still there, if she was still respectable, if she was still lost. Eli was down by the river, watering the horses. She walked out of the cabin, down the small path to the bank. He looked up, a silent question in his eyes. She did not say a word. She looked at her reflection one last time. Then she turned, and with a simple, fluid motion, she set the mirror down in the fast-moving water. The current caught it, tumbled it once, and it was gone. "I do not need to look any more," she said. Eli watched the water. Then he looked at her. He nodded. He understood. The summer faded. The aspens turned a brilliant, violent yellow, then shed their leaves. The air grew crisp. The nights grew long and cold. The first snows of their new winter began to fall. It was not a blizzard. It was a gentle, quiet dusting. They sat by their fire. The cabin was warm. The woodpile was high. The shelves were stocked with smoked meat and jars of dried beans from her garden. Eli reached into his pocket. He had been quiet all evening. I had to ride to the mining camp," he said, "for salt." He held out his hand. In his palm was a ring. It was not fancy. It was a simple, thin band of silver, probably hammered out by the camp's blacksmith. It was imperfect, a little uneven, but it shone in the firelight. Maribel stared at it. "It is not," he fumbled, the easy words leaving him. "It is just for when I forget, for when the winter gets long, and I forget why we made it, why I am alive." She did not cry. She looked at this man, at his broken face, at his admission of the darkness that would always be a part of him. She did not take the ring. Instead, she reached out and laid her hand flat on his chest, over his heart, over the shirt she had once torn open in anger. "Then I will remind you," she whispered. "My hands remember." He looked at her, and his gray eyes were clear. He took her left hand, the one that had held a knife and a rifle, and had planted a garden, and he slid the simple silver ring onto her finger. The fire burned low. The snow fell softly outside their new window, covering the valley in a clean, white blanket. This time, they were not trapped. They were not alone. They were not lost. They were not running. Even in the wild, love stays warm. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to hear your thoughts. So please comment with where you are listening from and connect with other fans. Do not forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more stories like this.